It is our great honor and pleasure to have as our speaker Professor Francesco Shankar. He's a professor of astrophysics in the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Southampton. He obtained his PhD at CISA, Italy, and has done a few postdocs from Ohio State University, then Max Planck Institute being a Humboldt Fellow, and then Paris Observatory being a Marie Curie Fellow. He then joined the department at Southampton in 2013. He is a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute and Royal Astronomical Society, amongst others. He is a part of diverse scientific advisory board panels worldwide and is leading a massive outreach project named Astera, a cosmological visualizer. Today, he will tell us about the novel semi-empirical model developed by his group to test galaxy assembly histories. Please.
Sonali, thank you so much for your kind introduction and for your kind invitation. I would like to thank you and the whole Institute for giving me a chance to talk to you today and to present my work. It's a real pleasure. So today I'm going to talk about assembly histories of galaxies. This is a list of collaborators. It's incomplete, but I would like to highlight two names here. Hao Fu, who's also connected here, my PhD student, and Viola Levato, my collaborator from Italy, who's also the WP9 co-lead of the production of AG and MOX in Euclid. So stay tuned. We will have, I will briefly mention this towards the end of my talk. So let me give you an outline what I'm going to talk today about. First, I will start giving you a flavor of the so-called technique of the semi-empirical modeling of galaxies, okay? So I will not talk about DREAM in this full specifics of DREAMs. So DREAM is our discrete semi-empirical model. The acronym is DREAM. And so I will not go into the fine details of that model, but I think I prefer to give you an overview because we have a broad audience today attending this talk. So I think I prefer to give you an overview of semi-empirical models, what they are, why they are useful, why people use them, and what we can learn from them. Then I will go to show you some applications of semi-empirical models applied to galaxy mergers and how you build the galaxy bulges as well. And then extensions of semi-empirical models to other galaxy properties, star formation, satellites, sizes, and velocity dispersion. The aim of this talk is twofold. First of all, I want to give you an overview of our research in galaxy evolution, but also I hope I inspire and trigger some new collaborations with some of you. I really look forward to having new collaborations with colleagues in your institute. So please come and talk to me at any time afterwards, after the talk, just get in touch, okay? So let's start with the semi-empirical modeling of galaxies. What does this really mean? So let's assume that we live in a dark matter dominated universe. So if that is the case, then the universe will be filled with dark matter halos. And each halo will build its mass in time. So if you start from the Big Bang, so this is the arrow of time from the Big Bang to the present day, you will see this assembly history of the dark matter halo, which is called, in technical terms, it's called the merger tree, just because it looks like a tree, right? Upside down or something like that. So the brown color here is dark matter, and dark matter builds in a hierarchical fashion from smaller units, and it builds up to massive halos today, like groups and clusters, right? And galaxies are thought to live and to evolve within the structures of dark matter halos. We just don't see them. This is the standard paradigm of the lambda CDM cosmology. We just don't see them, okay? Directly, they don't produce light, but they do host galaxies, and galaxies will form and evolve within these dark matter halos. So all theoretical models start from dark matter. Most of the theoretical models that start from the lambda CDM cosmology, they start from dark matter, and then galaxies will evolve within these dark matter halos. So there are several ways in which you can model galaxy evolution within dark matter halos. You can do it in one go with hydrodynamic simulations. So this is one of the many examples which are out there available. This is the Eagle simulation. And so you can see that these are the filaments of dark matter, and actually there is gas flowing through these filaments, and where these filaments meet, you will most probably form galaxies, and possibly even more than a galaxy or clusters of galaxies and so on. But there is another way to model galaxies in dark matter halos, and those are semi-analytic models. Semi-analytic models have been around now for 30, 40 years, and possibly even more. And what this image shows you is that there is these filaments of dark matter. This is an embodied simulation. And on top of this, you evolve galaxies from first principles. So you let the gas, you assume that there is amount of gas inside these halos, they cool, they form stars, and the stars can feed back energy, also momentum to the interstellar medium, and so on and so forth. There you can also form supermassive black holes and so on. But all of this, in the second technique of semi-analytic models, everything is analytic, while here everything is within the hydro simulation. Now, these models are extremely important and extremely interesting. So they have unveiled many properties of galaxy evolution. On the other hand, of course, they also suffer from some degeneracies, especially the semi-analytic models, but also the hydro simulations. You can start from same initial conditions and get different results, or you can also start from very different initial conditions and still get very similar results at the end. For example, the match to the stellar mass function, because you tune your parameters to match some specific observables. So you do tend, there are some degeneracies there, and there are many parameters involved. So it's not, we don't yet, for these reasons, we don't yet have a full transparent model of galaxy evolution. Just like we do have a standard model for particle physics, for example, why do we not really have a standard model for galaxy evolution yet, even though we have some clear ways in which we can form galaxies? So many of the details are still missing. So now there is a third approach to galaxy evolution, which is the semi-empirical model. The semi-empirical model starts also from, in a lambda CDM cosmology, it starts from an embodied simulation or analytic merger trees of dark matter. And then what you do is that you paint galaxies on top of these dark matter halos. So you don't evolve galaxies from scratch, but what you do is that you assign galaxies onto dark matter halos using a relation, a monotonic mapping between the stellar mass and the halo mass of the host. This is called the stellar mass halo mass relation, and it's data driven. And I will explain in a second what this means. So let me give you an overview of this type of framework. So in its essence, at least the very first models of semi-empirical models are fully based on the so-called Sabelo abundance matching technique. So this cartoon shows you what this is about. So on the y-axis, you have number density, and on the x-axis, you have mass. The blue line here is the observed stellar mass function. So this is the number densities of galaxies of a given mass. On the red line shows you the halo mass function. So this is not observed, but it's retrieved from in-body simulation. And as you know, it's mostly a power law, and then eventually at cluster scales, it will drop. So abundance matching is based on the mapping the cumulative abundances of galaxies and halos. So for example, I pick this stellar mass over here, I calculate the number densities over here, and I map these galaxies of this stellar mass to these halos that have this mass, and which are mapped via the equivalence between their number densities. So in other words, if I have 100 galaxies of 10 to the 11, I'm just saying 100 galaxies of 10 to the 11 stellar mass in a given comoving volume, I assign those to the halos that have the same number density in the same comoving volume. So the number density is equal to 100. And so I map those galaxies in those halos. And I keep on doing this for lower mass galaxies and higher mass galaxies. So in essence, in a nutshell, this is what abundance matching is about. So what this does for you is that it generates a monotonic relation between stellar mass and halo mass, which looks like this. It's a double power law, and it's a monotonic relation with a scatter that can be changed, it can be varied. There is a scatter, there is an intrinsic scatter to this relation. That's a different talk altogether. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but there is some scatter around this relation. But on average, there is a monotonic relation between stellar mass and halo mass. And this double power law feature, it's directly induced by this fall off in the stellar mass function, because you are changing quite rapidly the shape of the stellar mass function. This knee of the stellar mass function will be mapped onto this break in the stellar mass halo mass relation. But what you can see here is that I'm showing you two different models that have worked with this technique, and they give quite different results here. They are not identical. And why is that? So there are the reason why there is no unique mapping between stellar mass and halo mass. It's because the underlying, it's mostly induced, but not uniquely, but mostly induced by the fact that the initial data that you input in the abundance matching, and this is the reason why it's called the data-driven mapping, because it's driven by the observed number density of galaxies. This number density of galaxies is not set in stone. It's not just unique, one nice and smooth line. Unfortunately, the data do not agree on the exact shape of the stellar mass function. Let me give you an example. This is a collection of data sets at redshift 0 from different studies. I'm not going into any details here. I'm just want to show you that if you put everything together, you can see that a fixed stellar mass, this is stellar mass, at fixed stellar mass, there is the number density, this is logarithmic scale. So the number density from one work to another can vary systematically by a factor of 2 and even a factor of 10 when you go to higher masses over here. So there is quite a discrepancy at fixed redshift in the way people have measured the stellar mass function. Not only that, even its redshift evolution is still yet not known very accurately. And there are many reasons for this, which I'm not going to discuss. I don't have the time, but just trust me that there is still inconsistency. There are systematic uncertainties between the different studies, and these are observational studies. These are not models, these are data. So when you plug in either of these measurements in the abundance matching, of course, naturally, you will get different stellar mass, mass relation, simply because you are working with different data sets. And because it's a data driven, if you use a different input, you will get a distinct output. That's natural, right? Okay, so, but assume now for a moment that you fix your input stellar mass function and you get in output a given stellar mass halo mass relation. Now what do you do with this? Now this is the first step. It's to generate the mapping between galaxies and halos. Then you go to your n-body simulation or your analytic merger trees, and you start populating your halos with galaxies using this mapping, unique mapping between galaxies and halos, which is this one. So you pick one of your favorite stellar mass halo mass relation, and you start placing galaxies of a given mass based on the mass of the halo, of the host halo. And you do this at different redshifts, okay? because this is redshift dependent, this relation. In other words, you work the abundance matching at all redshifts based on the data that you have on the stellar mass function. And then you have so if you do this at different redshifts, you have placed, you can create your own light cone for galaxies, which is a mock observed universe where you actually place your galaxies in your halos based on this relation. And then you can also do much more than this. You can actually connect the dots, and you can connect. So for example, you can follow the evolution of this branch of the merger tree, and you can check what if this branch of the merger tree is consistent with what you get at redshift 0 for the stellar mass. So in other words, you study the mergers of these galaxies, the assembly histories of these galaxies, and so on and so forth. You can do many things with semi-empirical models. So bottom line, semi-empirical models are a very transparent way to place galaxies in dark matter halos. So you don't want to answer the full question, where do galaxies come from? Because semi-empirical models are not tuned to answer that question in full, but they are tuned to answer specific questions about, for example, what is the galaxy merger rate expected for a given stellar mass halo mass mapping. And I will show you this in the second part of the talk. So now let's go to some applications. I give you a broad overview of how semi-empirical, what is the scope and how you design a semi-empirical model. Now let's have a look at some applications of this and why they are useful. And in particular, most of the talk will be on the galaxy mergers and how these affect the galaxy bulges. Okay. So let me start giving you a brief overview. I'm sure all of you have seen this many times. Many of you are studying this, so I don't want to waste too much of your time on this, but just to give a brief recap on this so that we start from the same page, all of us. So you can see this is the Hubble tuning fork. This is the Hubble sequence. And you can see this is a redshift 0. This is 4 billion years. This is 11 billion years. And this redshift 0, you can see if you go to the left hand side of the screen here, you have round ellipticals. These are the most massive galaxies. If you go to the right, there is this tuning fork with two branches. Here you have the spiral. Here you have the spirals. Here you have different spirals with bars and possibly bulges. And here you have lenticulars. If you move to higher redshifts, you do still see a little bit of these structures, but these structures become a bit more irregular. And Sonali has done a lot of work in studying these structures from the observational point of view. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm sure she's already presented her work to you, and you have seen a lot of these studies before. But bottom line is that there is what I want to emphasize here is that there are distinct families of galaxies. Some of them have bulges. Roughly speaking, there are two distinct families, one with spiral arms like our Milky Way, and others that are mostly with a bulge component, a predominant bulge component, or even a full spheroidal galaxy like ellipticals. And the question is, where do these bulges come from? And most of the theoretical models suggest that many, but not all of them, suggest that this morphological transformation, so the idea is that galaxies prefer a spiral pattern initially because of conservation of angular momentum within the dark matter halo, but eventually they transform into bulges. And they do this, usually the idea, the running idea here, it's mergers, galaxy-galaxy mergers will produce bulges. Either they can produce bulges embedded in a disk, or if you have repeated mergers or possibly major mergers, you can form a full elliptical galaxy, which is mostly bulge dominated. And again, models do not agree on the full formation of bulges in general. There are different answers to this question, and Some models also prefer other types of formation also for bulges, and this is the so-called monolithic model, where basically what happens here is that it's not necessarily a merger or a sequence of mergers that dictates the morphology of the galaxy, but it's actually how the galaxy forms in situ that shapes the galaxy. And in this case, you have strong bars of star formation within the dark matter halo, and this can form a disky galaxy or a bulge inside, and then you can have a disk regrowth outside this bulge, which can be disk regrowth can happen within the same event, or it can be gas reaccreted at later times. Or you can have also, in some models, a formation of a real bulge-dominated galaxy with a minimal disk component. And if you actually look at these papers and you compare even the predictions, again, you can see very different initial conditions, but the end goal, the end point, for example, the stellar mass function, they can both reproduce the same stellar mass function, which is quite intriguing. So we wanted to answer this question about do mergers generate bulges, or do major mergers generate ellipticals? And we wanted to do this using a more transparent semi-empirical model. Why? Because the semi-empirical model, by definition, it's based on just a few input parameters. So it's not capable of answering all questions about galaxy evolution, but it can address some specific questions, like, for example, the rate of mergers in galaxies, and it can answer that question just based on very, very few parameters. So it's extremely transparent and extremely powerful technique. So this is the reason why I'm presenting this work, this technique to you today. So before answering the question, can galaxy mergers reproduce bulges today, I want to answer the question, what about dark matter? Because in a lambda CDM universe, we have galaxies living in dark matter halos. So before talking about baryons, before talking about galaxies, can we answer the question, how many mergers do you expect from dark matter itself? And so this is an answer that, again, we can use n-body simulations, we can use analytic models, and we can answer this question. This is the result that we have retrieved using DREAM. And basically, DREAM follows the merger trees of dark matter. And this is a merger tree where there are no galaxies, there is only dark matter. And we actually counted the number of mergers up to redshift 0 that you get as a function of halo mass. And this is the number of mergers above a given threshold. You can change this threshold. And the idea is that the higher the threshold, the lower the number of mergers. The lower the threshold, will have many, many more mergers. It's much more likely in a lambda CDM cosmology that you get minor mergers, so a mergers between a big guy and a small satellite, rather than a major merger where you have two big entities of similar mass merging together. So this is just to give you an overview, but the idea here, what is interesting from this plot is that the number of mergers does not depend on the number of halos. So this is interesting. Why is it interesting? Because if you assume that now each halos contains a galaxy inside, you would expect, naively, you would expect that from this plot, you would expect that if mergers are actually the drivers of bulges, you would expect that all galaxies today, irrespective of their host halo mass, they would all have massive bulges inside, just because the number of mergers is identical, irrespective of the halos. But that's not true. I just showed you before that observations tell us that there is a rich zoology of galaxies today. So it cannot be true what I just stated. So what's happening here? Well, the reason is because I just showed you the mergers of dark matter halos. But this similarity in the number of mergers breaks down when you convert the mapping, when you convert dark matter halos into galaxy mergers. So we go back to our stellar mass relation now, and we start populating our halos with galaxies using this relation. And now you will see in a moment that these dark matter halos do not map these dark matter, these mergers of halos. The similarity breaks easily when you convert to galaxies. Why? Because the relation between stellar mass and halo mass is it's linear, but it's there is a double power law that shapes the mapping between halos and galaxies. So because of this break in the stellar mass and mass relation, you will have a break in the merger histories of galaxies. So let me show you this in a second. So this is the result of galaxies. So this is the number of mergers as a function now of stellar mass, no longer halo mass, but of stellar mass. And just focus on the red line. Don't bother about the blue line. Just look at the red line here. So you can see now that you have broken that homology in number of mergers in dark matter. You have broken that when you have transformed your dark matter halo mergers into galaxy mergers. And you have seen, and you can see here that the number of mergers now, this is the number of mergers above, again, at a given threshold. This is, I think, 0.2 or so. And you can see here that the galaxies below 10 to the 11 are expected to have maybe at the most one merger above this mass ratio. But when you go above 10 to the 11, and when you reach the very massive galaxies of 10 to the 12, here you can have as many as 6, 7, or even up to 10 sometimes mergers, okay, at this stellar mass scale. So things are very different when you go from halos to galaxies. But here you can see that I'm showing you 4 panels. I'm not showing you 1 panel, but 4. So why am I doing this? Because I just told you that the mapping between stellar mass and halo mass is not unique. So if you change your mapping between a stellar mass and halo mass, you do generate different merger histories for your galaxies. And the result is shown here. The explanation for this is detailed in this slide, but I don't think I want to go now into the full details of this. But if you're interested, you can ask me later how this actually works. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to show you the result and tell you that if you change your mapping between stellar mass and halo mass within the constraints given by observations, here you can show, this is the result. You can see that the number of mergers that you predict can be significantly different by up to a factor of 2 to 3. And this, of course, will have an impact on the amount of bulges that you can form at redshift 0. So let's now answer the question: can major mergers generate the right number of ellipticals? So this question stems from the basic assumption that has been out there in the literature of theoretical models of galaxy evolution for many years, for decades. And the question was, this has been inspired by the very first simulations of mergers between a disk galaxy and another disk galaxy. For example, the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxy simulations show that if these two disks merge, in a few billion years, we would live in a full elliptical galaxy. So the idea here is that many models suggest that the number of ellipticals is correlated to the number of major mergers. Okay. So what is the answer to this question? Well, based on what I just told you, I think you would also be in a position now to answer it from the semi-empirical point of view. You would answer this question by saying, well, it depends. They may or may not be enough, the major mergers, to generate the right number of ellipticals. And in fact, this is the answer to this question. Here, I'm showing you the fraction of ellipticals taken from the Sloan digital sky survey redshift 0 as a function of stellar mass. These are the data points. This is the fraction of ellipticals. This is actually measured. And you can see the fraction of ellipticals tends to rapidly go to 0 below 10 to the 11. There aren't many pure ellipticals below redshift, below 10 to the 11, but they rapidly grow in number when you go above 10 to the 11 up to 10 to the 12. And the vast majority of 10 to the 12 galaxies are spheroid dominated. These lines, just focus on these two lines, the solid line over here, the orange line, and this dotted line over here. These two lines correspond to those two stellar mass-mass relation that I showed you before. So those two stellar mass-mass relation that I showed you before, these ones, these two, are not so different in shape, especially here, right? I mean, this one is maybe a little bit lower in normalization. It's a bit flatter, maybe. This one is a bit steeper. But just by changing the tilt of that high mass end just a little bit within the observational constraints, this is what you get. You get a massive difference in the number of predicted ellipticals that you have at redshift 0. So this is a very important result, and I would like to highlight it and stress it here. So the answer to the question, so this is what we are bringing to the table of the theoretical models. So theoretical models sometimes have diverged and have given different answers to the fact, can the mergers, major mergers, predict the right number of ellipticals? Well, it depends on which mapping you are using. Now, it's not just semi-empirical models. The mapping happens everywhere. So there will always be a mapping between halos and galaxies. It can be extracted from an hydro simulation. It can be extracted from a semi-analytic model, but you will always have a mapping. Now, if your mapping predicts a steep relation between stellar mass and halo mass, you will tend to have less major mergers, and you might be more in line with the number of ellipticals that you have at redshift 0. If your mapping instead predicts a flatter relation between stellar mass and halo mass, you will have more major mergers. And this predicts this, for example, models like this one, the dotted line here. So there are systematic, so these systematics in the way you map galaxies into halos can have a profound impact in the way you model galaxies and in the way you interpret your modeling of galaxies. So, and this is a clear example of this. So it's really, really important. And semi-empirical models are very transparent tools that allow us to actually probe and answer these questions. And so we can, for example, if we say that major mergers should really be the triggers behind the formation of ellipticals, then in turn, that could give us a constraint between the mapping between the stellar mass and halo mass. In this case, they suggest that the mapping should be steeper rather than flatter. We actually wanted, and then we wanted to answer another question with this type of models, which is, for example, can these semi-empirical models also predict not only the number of mergers, but also not only the number of spheroids and bulges in the local universe, but also the mean ratio between the mass of the bulge and the mass of the stellar mass of the total galaxy. And this is something that we can answer with our approach, because if we are assuming that all mergers end up in bulges, then we can predict for a given galaxy, we can predict the fraction of that galaxy that goes into the bulge mass. And so we can generate plots of this type, where we are here plotting the mean B over T, bulge to total stellar mass, as a function of stellar mass. These points here are again from, these are data from, again, from SDSS, the same data set that I showed you before. The data set comes from the set of Mariangela Bernardi with improved photometry and the bulge to this decomposition, but that's a different talk. I'm not going to those details again. So these are these are the data points, and these two lines are our prediction for the B over T. There are two models here. These two models are now, there are two models where we are fixing the stellar mass-mass relation, but we are assuming that when there is a major merge, we are taking two scenarios for the major merger. When there is a major merger, we assume that the two progenitors become one elliptical with a B over T of 1. And then in another scenario, we are assuming that when there is a major merger, these two galaxies do not immediately become an elliptical with B over T over 1, but we allow for some disk regrowth, like some simulations suggest, and some models. And if we do that, we get, if we do the latter model with disk regrowth, and we assume that this is significant as much as some simulations suggest, then we get this line over here, which is the orange line. And you can see there is a massive discrepancy with B over T of 1, of course, because if as in this region, the data suggests the B over T is very close to 1, and here these models do struggle to reproduce a B over T over 1. In this case, there are these models that predict that they perform a bit better, where models where we assume that B over T is very close to 1 when the two progenitors merge in a major merger. Irrespective of what the major mergers do, or even the minor mergers do, all these models fall short in reproducing the bulges below 10 to the 11 solar masses. We strongly believe that below 10 to the 11, we need additional components to our modeling in order to reproduce this, and possibly it's disk instabilities. Again, you can see how powerful these semi-empirical models are. The semi-empirical models that I just showed you are based on just a few parameters. In this case, we have only two parameters. One is the scatter around the stellar mass-mass relation. The other parameter is the amount of bulge formation in a major merger, and that's it. Truly, that's it. So we are extremely transparent in how much in our predictions, because we are not dealing with 20 or 30 free parameters, just a few. And therefore we are limited in the number of predictions, but for those specific predictions that we make, we are very sure of what we are predicting. We are not, in other words, we are not prone to massive degeneracies because we are dealing with only a few parameters. And in this case, because we don't have any more parameters to play with in our models, we must include additional degrees of complexities in our models in order to reproduce the data. So in other words, the idea of semi-empirical models, it's I would say a top-up approach where we start from the bottom, and so from a bottom-up approach. So we start from the bottom, and then we make the models more and more complex if we need to reproduce more and more observables. But our scope is different from a semi-analytic model, where you start from many different parameters and input assumptions, and you want to reproduce everything in one go. So we break down this procedure, if you want, in more manageable components. Okay, that does not mean that we replace semi-analytic or hydro simulation. By no means. This is not the aim. I'm not saying this in this talk. Our aim is to provide a complementary tool to what is already out there to model galaxy evolution. How much time do I have left, Sonali?
I don't know, 10 minutes is good.
10 minutes. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very good. So this is in the last few minutes, I just want to show you a few more things that you can do with semi-empirical models, just very quickly. The things that we have done in the last years, just to touch base on different topics that we have covered with semi-empirical models. You can do a lot with semi-empirical models. Not everything, but you can do a lot. So the first thing that we looked at is satellite, is the fraction of satellites. So far I told you about mergers. Mergers, so mergers are between the galaxy, the central galaxy, and a satellite galaxy that comes in and eventually will merge with the central galaxy. That's a merger. But you can imagine, for example, that there is a satellite that comes in and starts orbiting, and when we go down to redshift 0, this satellite, it's still orbiting. And that's what we see, for example, in groups, in clusters, right? We do see many, many satellites, galaxies. We do see there is a central galaxy and we have many satellites around it. So we wanted to explore what is the prediction on the number of satellites from these semi-empirical models when we change the input stellar mass halo mass relation. So what you see here is again the stellar mass function. There are two data sets here. The data set in red is the total stellar mass function at redshift 0 from SDSS. The blue is the satellite stellar mass function. So the number of satellites that are competing to this fixed stellar mass. So if you do the blue, if you are to plot blue divided by red, you get the fraction of satellites as a function of stellar mass. All these lines are our predictions from the semi-empirical model. Now, of course, by design, here I'm showing you 4 different models from our semi-empirical model. These are four different stellar mass halo mass relations. By design, all the stellar mass halo mass relations start from the same stellar mass function, and therefore they are able to reproduce the stellar mass function by design. So this is not a prediction, this is an input of the model. Remember the abundance matching that I told you about before. The real prediction of the semi-empirical model here are the blue lines. And you can see that not all the blue lines are able to reproduce to match the number densities of satellites. Only one among the 4 is able to reproduce the number density of satellites. And the interesting thing about this is that the model that is able to match this number of satellites is the same one that is able to reproduce the fraction of ellipticals that I showed you above. So in a sense, with our approach, we are narrowing down the possibilities between the mapping between stellar mass and halo mass. And we are hoping to get eventually one mapping between stellar mass and halo mass that is able to reproduce all the observables which are out there. Another thing that you can do with the semi-empirical model is star formation histories. And I'll just give you the basic idea here. So here you can see there are 2 lines here. This is the blue line, the blue thick solid line. This is the average growth of a galaxy that today has a mass of 10 to the 12 solar masses. And this is the prediction from the semi-empirical model of what its mass was in the past, okay, on average. The dashed line that you see over here, it's the average contribution to its growth coming from mergers, any merger, major or minor merger. So you can see that this dashed line, it's below the solid line. What that means is that the growth of this galaxy cannot all be induced by mergers. And the idea here is that we are able to constrain the amount of mass growth in a galaxy that comes via star formation rate. So you should imagine that there are 2 channels to grow a galaxy. The galaxy can grow in mass because it's converting its gas into stars. And so this is internal star formation. And because there is assembly, there is more mass coming out from mergers. And so there are these 2 channels. And the question is, how much does a galaxy form via star formation or via mergers? Well, we can answer that question by looking at these semi-empirical models, because the semi-empirical models give you the total mass which comes from mergers. And if you compute the difference between total growth and mass from the mergers, you can compute the amount of mass that comes from star formation. And so we are working on this, and our initial results are very promising because the amount of star formation seems to match independent measurements of the star formation rate in galaxies. That's a different talk. We have also used our semi-empirical model to assign sizes to our galaxies, not only stellar mass via the stellar mass relation, but also sizes. So the semi-empirical approach can be used for all types of galaxy properties: stellar mass, effective radius, and also velocity dispersion, which I'll show you in the next slide. In this specific instance, this is work done with my PhD student, Lorenzo Zanisi. He has worked a lot on this mapping, specifically between the size now of the galaxies and the size of the dark matter halo, and to assign sizes to the stellar masses. And via this approach, we are able to reproduce a number of observables, like, for example, the size function in the local universe, as well as the size evolution of galaxies. And then we have also included velocity dispersions. Velocity dispersion require a full GINS modeling. This is the stellar velocity dispersion. So, but I'm not going into any details, but basically what we are able to do is to predict the sigma, this velocity dispersion of a galaxy for a given stellar mass. And again, we do this via a simple semi-empirical approach. And we are able to reproduce also the Faber-Jackson, and we're able to reproduce also its evolution with redshift. As I said in the last 2 minutes, I just want to promote and here give you a hint of what we are doing in Euclid. So in Euclid, we are building galaxy mocks, and especially we are building AGN mocks within a WP9 with Viola Levato. WP9 is one of the work packages in Euclid. So if you're interested, please come and talk to me or Viola about this. It's a really exciting work, and how is also heavily involved in this. So what we are doing here is that now we are doing abundance matching, but using black hole mass. So we are first assigning a galaxy to a dark matter halo, and then we are assigning a black hole given the stellar mass or the velocity dispersion of the galaxy. We are assigning a probability for this black hole to be active. We are assigning a rate of accretion for this black hole. So this is the Eddington ratio. We are also assigning a probability for this for a centered and satellite to be active. And if we do this, we are able to reproduce a number of observables. Like, for example, without degeneracies, we are able to reproduce a number of observables like the AGN X-ray luminosity function, the clustering of AGN as a function of stellar mass, black hole mass, and X-ray luminosity. The clustering means the spatial distribution of AGN. So we are using this to build AGN mocks within Euclid. So I just want to show you if this works. I want to show you a realization of a galaxy mock in 3D. This is Astera, the program that Sonali was mentioning at the beginning. This is a full immersion this is a full immersion. It's interactive, fully interactive, so you can fly through the universe in this. You cannot see it here, but we also have AGN in this. And stay tuned. In fact, we are now working to convert this into a game, which we want to upload in dedicated platforms like Google Play and Steam. But we want to really make our research as accessible as possible for the general public. It's very important, of course, to disseminate our research, as you know. This is my summary of this talk. I just wanted to give you a flavor of what a semi-empirical model is and why this is useful. I hope I've convinced you that the semi-empirical model it's a complementary tool to existing techniques, and it's quite transparent because it's based on a few parameters. And with these parameters, you can study a number of things like merger histories, star formation histories, satellite abundances, but also other properties like sizes and velocity dispersions, and even AGN. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Francesco, for such a detailed and interesting talk. So let's have questions. Actually, I wanted to say that people have heard about semi-analytical model, but not so much about the semi-empirical one.
Right. Exactly.
So if you could just tell like what is the major way in which it is different and how it is more useful, and so if you could just tell a little about that.
Sure. So as I hinted at the beginning, I mean, I would not say it's more useful, but they are just complementary techniques. They have different goals. So the semi-analytic model, it's extremely important. It's vital that these models are out there. And because a semi-analytic model starts from scratch. So from zero order, you build up the galaxy population using different recipes for the cooling, for the star formation, and for the feedback within a dark matter halo. So all of this is extremely important because we need to understand the fine details of the physical processes that are behind, that are regulating and controlling galaxy growth, right, and evolution. The semi-empirical approach already assigns fully fledged galaxies in dark matter halos, okay? So you don't need to grow them in the first place. But that's not because you're not interested in that. It's simply because you are interested in different, with the semi-empirical approach, you are interested in a different question. And in this specific instance, for example, I was interested in answering the question, how many galaxy mergers are out there? And are these enough and sufficient to generate the number of ellipticals or the number of bulges that we see in the local universe? And if you don't want to, and you can use a semi-analytic model, of course, in order to answer that question, but the semi-empirical approach is, in a sense, it's a bit more flexible and transparent than a semi-analytic model to answer that question. But both of them are important and extremely complementary, okay?
Oh, thanks. And another question was that you have to compare it with the stellar mass, halo mass empirical relations. So those also keep improving. I mean, how are those computed?
Right. Yes. So the stellar mass, halo mass relations come from this technique of abundance matching between the stellar mass function and the halo mass function. There are also other techniques to get the mapping between the galaxies and halos, but I'm not going into those details right now. But in essence, there is this mapping, this where you basically generate this equality between the cumulative numbers of galaxies and the cumulative number of halos. And that mapping is able to generate for you this monotonic mapping between stellar mass and halo mass. But what I told you is that, unfortunately, the observed stellar mass function is yet not very well known. There are still some systematic uncertainties in the determination of the number of galaxies in a comoving volume. And that uncertainty propagates into the mapping between stellar mass and halo mass, because the mapping, it's fully based on the number densities of galaxies. So if you change that, you will change your mapping. Does it make sense?
Yes. And we have a question. Let's take that.
Yep.
Biman?
Yeah. So very nice talk. Thank you for the talk. And I was just wondering if the differences between wet mergers and dry mergers play any role in the sort of calculations that you do.
Very good. Very good question. Thank you. Thank you, Biman. Very nice question. So the question is about wet and dry. What that means is that a wet merger is a merger between two progenitor galaxies that are gas rich and above a certain threshold. And the dry mergers are merger between two progenitors which are gas poor. And the question is about, do you expect any difference or any role played by these wet and dry mergers in building bulges? Mainly because we know from hydro simulation, especially, we know that if the galaxies are wet, in the sense they are gas rich when they merge, the effect of the in the descended galaxy will be different from a case where the two galaxies do not have gas inside. So thank you for this question. So wet and dry mergers have been included in semi-empirical models in different aspects. In this specific instance, we have not distinguished between wet and dry. We have just taken all types of mergers, okay? And we have assumed that all major mergers, for example, in the plot that I showed you for ellipticals, all major mergers can produce an elliptical galaxy. We have also a recipe to include gas fractions, again, in a semi-empirical approach, where we assign gas fractions called gas into all galaxies, either centrals or satellites, using empirical observed relation. One of the ones that we follow, it's Stewart et al. 2009, for example, which is a nice fit to a different data sets. And if you do that, you can try and think, you can distinguish between wet and dry mergers. So for example, you can say that a wet merger is more prone to form a disk, while a dry merger to form, let's say, to regrow a disk, while you can say that a dry merger will most probably end up with a pure spheroid with a minimal disk component. But the two models that I showed you over there give you a nice sense of where you are heading to, because as I showed you, for example, for the B over T ratios, that's very, very informative to distinguish this type of approach, because if you want, because the data suggests that B over T is very close to 1 when you go to very high masses. Now, if you want B over T close to 1, there is not much room for having a disk regrowth at the time of the major merger.
Sure.
So that's the idea. And that's the reason why we are showing you those two extreme models, just to give you a flavor of where the brackets, where these two models, the range of systematics differences.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have one question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is regarding a very early figure that you showed, where the number densities were used to, the matching number densities were used to get the halo mass and so on after knowing the stellar mass. In there, the question is how, firstly, matching the number densities appears very risky, as if one is assuming that the sample is complete, in the sense there are no selection effects and so on and so forth. If that is affected by selection effects and you have less number, then you're matching the wrong pairs, so to say. Is that one of the concerns, or it's not?
Thank you very much for the question. So let me to go back to that plot so that it's easier to. So very good. So the question is about. Thank you for the question. So the question is about this blue line, which is the stellar mass function. So the question is about, there could be selection effects that could impact the number densities, for example, at low masses, and rightly so. The question, the question is, if you have not properly corrected for selection effects, then you're mapping. So this number density is just wrong, and you're mapping these galaxies to the wrong halos. That's the idea, and it's true, absolutely true. So we are relying on observers. So in a sense that we are relying on their published data sets, and most of them are they say that they are complete in their samples, but but they are complete within the observability of their sample. So for example, if they are, I don't know, if they are observing in the UV, that would be a UV based, an optically based stellar mass function. But we know, for example, that galaxies, when we go to higher and higher redshifts, galaxies become more and more star forming and more dust enshrouded. So it's a very good question, this one, because you could have a selection effect simply because you are observing in just one band, and you are missing out on other galaxy populations that are kind of invisible or incomplete in that waveband that you are observing in. And this happens, we know, for example, in the Herschel data sets, we know that's far infrared, right? And also in the submillimeters, we have many, many more galaxies popping up that are not necessarily recorded in this type of stellar mass functions. That's a very good question. And what do we do? Well, again, we can try to correct for these. We have published some papers with the group in CISA, Andrea Lapi and others. We have published papers in which we showed some corrections of the stellar mass function when we include, for example, invisible galaxies in the optical, and we generate the stellar mass relation for those types of galaxies. Now, I must admit that even when you correct for those types of possible incompletenesses, the result is not that different, in the sense that it's much more relevant, this type of inconsistencies like these ones, which are not necessarily driven by these type of systematics of incompleteness of the wavelength in which you're observing in, but mostly due to the fact of how you estimate stellar masses. For example, sometimes are only based on SED fitting. There is no photometry especially for higher redshift galaxies. So you are based on SED fitting and that's it. While, for example, in SDSS, you have first an SED, you have first a photometry based light, and then you transform that with mass to light ratios into a stellar mass. And if you actually compare like I do here in this, this is a redshift 0, where you don't have this type of too much of these systematics that I was talking about because of the infrared or so on. Here you can see here that there is a very massive discrepancy, mostly induced by the fact that these are very different ways in which you estimate the stellar masses. And it's really, really significant. I mean, this is a factor of 10, possibly even more at the very high masses. And this has a massive impact in the way you compute, then you generate the mergers.
Yeah, thanks. If I'm allowed to just ask a corollary of this.
Yeah, sure.
So would this mapping look different at different redshifts?
Yes, absolutely. So I did not, this relation is only a redshift 0, but you can plot it at different redshifts with the available data that you have, okay? Again, within the remit of the data that are right now available. And we do see some evolution in the stellar mass. So it does evolve. But I must admit, it doesn't evolve too much, especially at the high masses. We don't see too much of an evolution. Most of the evolution is actually around the knee and below the knee.
Do we have another question?
Okay.
Mosby, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the nice talk. I just wanted to ask you, so you have used an empirical relation between gas mass and stellar mass, I guess, right, for the star formation. How does that relation vary with redshift? How have you chosen that?
Yes, thank you. So the question is about the gas fractions and if we use them to generate the star formation rate. So I just wanted to clarify that in the plot that I showed you about the star formation rates, those are not based on gas fractions, okay? So we are not assuming any gas fraction here. And this is the beauty, if you want, of this type of approach. So in this specific instance, these are results that have been published by another student of mine, Philip Grills, in 2020. So if you are interested, you can have a look at that, or you just email me later. I can give you more details about this. But the bottom line here is that the star formation rate of the galaxies is not driven by any assumption, any underlying assumption on the gas fractions. This is simply extracted from the difference between the total growth of the galaxy and the amount of mass that comes through mergers. So you should imagine that the galaxy grows via two channels, star formation and mergers. In the semi-empirical approach, we can very well follow the merger history, the merger component. But because we also have the total component, we can simply subtract from the total the merger component and call that difference, we call it star formation.
Okay. So I guess then you could work backward and put a star formation efficiency or rate and obtain a gas mass.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's correct. So here in this plot, which I did not spend too much time on this. So this is exactly what we are trying to do in this paper. And this is the second, this is paper in preparation. So we don't have the gas masses yet, but we have, what you see over here is the detailed star formation rate that so that difference, from that difference, then you have to correct for the mass loss from the stars. So there is a little bit of work to polish there a little bit that quantity. Then you retrieve the star formation rate. Then from there, you can, like you said, yes, you can get some sense of what could be the gas fractions or the depletion timescales and so on, those type of quantities. Yes, you can. And but this is paper in preparation. And if you actually, again, if you are interested, we can talk about this later on offline.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, can I ask one more question, Shonali?
Yes, please.
Okay, the other question is that do you distinguish between, say, pseudo bulges and classical bulges in your in the model, in the empirical model? Can
Very
you?
Good.
Or...
Very good. That's another very good point. So this is again what the question is about the types of bulges, stellar bulges that you have in galaxies. Some of them are called the classical bulges for different reasons, because they resemble more the properties of more massive spheroids, and others are they are called the pseudo bulges because they are closer to a disky-like profile, a stellar profile. And again, Sonali has done a lot of work on this, so I'm not going to enter into those details, but this is the question is about this distinction. And yes, so we are actually in this plot that I showed you about a bulge, this one. In this one, we are not labeling our bulges either classical or pseudo, because we don't have that type of refinement in our models, because at the end of the day, it's analytic. So it's not a simulation. So we don't fit. We are not able even to fit the profiles or something like that. We don't do that. But having said this, we can try to distinguish in a theoretical sense classical and pseudo bulges by saying that the former, the classical bulges, are those that arise from mergers mostly. And we can say that pseudo bulges are those that come from different channels, like disk instabilities. And from this plot, what we could derive from this plot and conclude, we could assume that according to our model, most of the bulges that are above 10 to the 11, we would label them as classical, and below we would label them mostly as pseudo.
Okay. But so the blue and the orange model, what is the difference? I couldn't make that out.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So the difference is that they come from the same stellar mass-mass relation, but we make an additional assumption, is that when two galaxies merge, we can choose how to redistribute that mass. And we can assume that if it's a major merger between two progenitors of similar mass, we can assume that when they merge, most of the mass ends up in a big spheroidal galaxy with B over T equal to 1. Or we can assume that it's not equal to 1, but it's below 1 because there is a disk component retained from the major merger, or there is a regrowth of a disk around at the bulge. And these two scenarios are motivated by hydro simulations, both of them. And so we wanted to test these ones. And what we learned from this, it's clear that if you want to have B over T equal 1 over here, it's natural that you cannot allow for too much disk regrowth in major mergers. Otherwise, you struggle to get up here. Basically. That's the idea.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice talk. Thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you.
We are totally running out of time, but Francesco, you can see the interest here.
Very good. I'm really glad about this.
We would like you to visit physically soon.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I will try my best, really.
So
I
that
also
will be
want to
really
come to
great.
India. It's been a long time since I visited India last time. So yes, I want to come. I will try my best, but definitely please get in touch, because I can see that several people are either, you are working, or there are some interest lying in this. There's overlapping interest here. So please get in touch. I'm sure we can do a lot of nice work together.
And thank you for for taking out so much time and answering all the questions and such a nice talk.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
All the best.
So, thank you. Thank you.
Bye.